If you would please stand and join me as we say the pledge and have an invocation. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for another opportunity to come together, Lord, and to try to take care of the business of Walton County. Pray that you'll just give us guidance, give us wisdom, and help us to get through this agenda and do things in the best interest of the citizens of this county. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. The first item is approval of the minutes. Everybody had a chance to review them? We have a motion?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Real quick before we get started, just a few quick announcements. Just to remind everybody, if you haven't already done so, to either turn off or silence your cell phone, minimize distractions. We have a lengthy agenda today. Hopefully it won't take as long as I think it did, as I thought it would. Once I came in here and saw there's at least 4 or 5 attorneys present, so we can get past them, we'll be okay. But anyway, we will have a 9 o'clock time certain end of the meeting. Anything that is not completed by 9 o'clock will be moved to next month's agenda. I'm very, very hopeful we don't have to even get close to that. So with that, Mr. Carpenter, let's get going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Matt Carpenter for the Planning Department, CARPENTER. The first item for consideration tonight is a continued item from the July 11th Planning Commission meeting, the South Orange Street Lots Right-of-Way Abandonment. It's a request to approve by resolution. It's been reviewed by Keli Frymire. It's a petition for abandonment submitted by Earl Ly III and David Theriak on behalf of Earl Ly III, Lucy Melinda Anderson, and Hunter Kidd, Megan Phillips, and Toby A.W. Kidd, requesting Walton County to abandon the 33-foot right-of-way for roadway and public utility purposes that extends along the southern portion of the 2 lots. Properties have a future land use of residential and a zoning designation of neighborhood infill, and they're located at the southeast corner of the intersection of US 98 and South Orange Street, and are identified by the parcel numbers in your package. As this is a continuation, and you gave some direction to the parties at the last meeting, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Theriak to continue his presentation.
Okay.
Good evening. David Theriak on behalf of the Kidd family. If we could, I have a PowerPoint here. If we could go to page 2, please. There we go. Just wanted to reorient you to what we're looking at. The yellow is the 33-foot right-of-way on the Kidd family. The green is the 33 feet to the south of the Kidd family property. And we've also provided you with the names of the owners of each of the lots that are nearby and the location of the spec house that Mr. Steffen has or is either in the process or has completed. The next slide, please. This is just to refresh the access to the surrounding lots. The lot in question that we were directed to try to resolve was 173. Currently, lot 147 has a curb cut onto 98. If we could go to the next page, please. This is an email from FDOT. It was Melinda Clumford to Cappy Kidd on July 19th. The key part of this email, and I'll read it quickly. According to my interpretation of FAC, that's the Florida Administrative Code, 14.96 and 14.9, along with information found on property appraiser's website, The Inlet Beach Capital property shown below doesn't have reasonable access except to State Road US 98. A connection to US 98 for this parcel would not meet FDOT access management spacing criteria. However, per FAC excerpt shown above, a property that cannot meet the access management standards for a connection as set forth herein is eligible to be permitted by the department for a single connection pursuant to Rules Chapter 14-96 FAC. Also, I have no knowledge of Inlet Beach Capital property owner contacting our office to discuss possible access or submitting for an access permit to date. Next slide, please. The direction that I understood that this board or the commission provided to us based upon the continuance was for the Cabby family, the Kidd family, to reach out to Mr. Pearson's corporate entity to see if we could resolve the access issue as it pertained to his property. This is a copy of a letter dated July 26, 2019, that I sent to Mr. Pearson, the owner of the Inlet Beach Capital Investments, LLC. I won't read the whole letter, but the crux of it is the Kidd family offered to close the access that they had on lot 147 and open a joint access that straddled the property line with the Pearson property and the Kidd family, which would have been close to that arrow that we had for 173. And that they would close their existing, have a joint shared. They asked for Inlet Beach Capital Investments to pay for the cost of constructing the relocated curb cut and requested that this would resolve the access issue and requested the support of Mr. Pearson and his corporate entity. The next few slides are just to show you that these were our efforts to reach out. If we could just flip through them pretty quickly. I sent an email to Mr. Whitaker on July 26 with a copy of my letter. I did not have Mr. Pearson's contact information at that point, and I know Mr. Whitaker spoke here on behalf of Mr. Pearson, so I reached out to Mr. Whitaker. The next slide is just a copy of my letter to email to Mr. Pearson with the attached letter. We didn't hear anything, so again on August 3rd, I reached back out to Mr. Pearson and his corporate entity. And then the next slide is I also reached out to Mr. Whitaker on August 3rd. And then on August 6th, which is the next slide, if we can go there you go. We received an email from Keli Frymire. I'm not sure what her capacity is at the Inlet Beach Capital Investments LLC, but she states that she's responding to our letter and stated that, and I highlighted in bold, it is equally challenging to logic your offer to have us pay for curb cuts to a proposed access from US 98 that does not exist, which we have not asked for and we do not want. So they essentially rejected our offer of a shared joint access that would straddle the property lines of my client and Mr. Pearson's property. The next document I attached just to refresh your memory, this is the patent deed that was issued to the Kidd family's father. And it stated it was for a 33-foot right-of-way for roadway and public utility purposes. And I'll get back to that. If we could skip over. Just also wanted to refresh your recollection that Wilmer Strafford, the Director of Public Works, wrote a letter on April 3 stating we have confirmed that the county has not conveyed any interest or rights in the right-of-way to any private individual or entity. Additionally, the county has not granted permission to any private individual or entity to construct a road in the right-of-way. Next slide, please. This was the application for opening unimproved right-of-ways that the Inlet Beach Corporation submitted to the county in April 25, a couple months after they clear-cutted the Kidd family's property. And you'll notice that they're attempting to use the right-of-way for a 20-foot wide driveway, so a personal driveway to their lot, not a road. The next page is also a document that Mr. Pearson's entity submitted to the county, clear 20 feet for a 16 to 18 foot wide driveway. Driveway does not fall within the patent deed. And in the email that we received from Inlet Beach Capital Investments LLC, They said that their deed established their entitlement to utilize the right-of-way on the Kidd family property. So the next document is the special warranty deed that was from the bank to Inlet Beach Capital Investments LLC, and you'll see there is no mention to the ability to use another piece of property that's not subject to the deed. There's an Exhibit A, that's just to show you that that's the parcel that we're dealing with, 148, 173. And there was a less than accept, 2 other deeds. I attached those. Those are the next couple of deeds, and if you look at those deeds, there's nothing in those deeds that created any entitlement to somebody to utilize the 33-foot right-of-way on the Kidd family property. And that's the warranty deed from FDOT, or to FDOT, and another warranty deed at Book 2566. The other 2 documents that I handed to you, because they weren't very clear on the PowerPoint, I think because it was a copy of a copy, these were, these are clearer copies of the clear cut that took place on the Kidd family property without their consent and without the permission of the county. And so we would request that the Planning Commission recommend approval of abandoning the 33-foot right-of-way. There is access available to Mr. Pearson's property on 98. We've got the email from FDOT, and we also stand by our offer that if for some reason FDOT did not grant them access, we would agree, the Kidd family would agree to close the existing access, move it to a shared access that straddles both property lines. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Who would pay for that?
Our offer that we sent to Mr. Pearson's group was asking for him to pay for that. We already have an access. We would close our access and then move it so there would be a joint access. I don't know if there's room to negotiate on that. I got a response that just simply said, we have no interest in 98.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Commissioners.
Who's next? Yes, sir. Is there anybody else here from the? You can come on.
Melissa Ward with Dunlap and Shipman. I believe you have in a packet a letter from Robert Kaufman. You received it late today, so I think it's in your additional packet. If you do not have it, I do have copies here. Essentially, the biggest part of our letter today is that in the last meeting on July the 11th, my apologies, Dunlap and Shipman representing Inlet Dunes Homeowners Association or Condo Owners Association. In your last meeting on July the 11th, there was a motion to continue this particular abandonment to the next meeting with the suggestion that the parties come to a solution for the access. And when I watched the meeting, this communication was going on. There were other people involved. David Pearson is not the only party that objected. And Joey Steffen was here for his entire subdivision. And at the time, Inlet Dunes had not proffered any objection. The letter goes on to explain that there was some miscommunication. And so what we wanted to first ask is that you don't make a decision today, that you continue it for another month and allow the parties to come to discuss the potential of fixing this situation. Barring that, we would like to make our objection known. The abandonment of the right-of-way on the Kidd property, the Inlet Dunes Association is not objecting to, in general, abandonment of that right-of-way. What they are objecting to is the way that it will affect their property. In the bigger sense of the word, we could possibly negotiate a narrowing of that right-of-way that would facilitate a bigger buildable space on that property and also access, which is already there because of that right-of-way. So one of the comments that I heard from Mr. Thierek, and I haven't seen the letter, so I'm going from memory and it could be completely in error, so my apologies. But the letter from DOT said that if they didn't have access because they didn't have access, other access, they could get this access off of 98. But Mr. Pearson, his statement in his email is, I have access. So the question is, does he or does he not have access? That's not my issue, but it brings up that the DOT stuff is not pertinent if he actually has access. If in fact he has access and you don't abandon it, then he doesn't need access off of 98. I'm sure that's his position.
His access, what he's referring to
Is the existing easement, yes, or right-of-way. And the inlet dunes has a driveway on the southern half of that 66-foot right-of-way. They have a driveway. They, in fact, are correcting a code enforcement violation because they have a gate in that right-of-way and it needs to come out of it. And they also have a dumpster, which presently, I believe, is on Mr. Kidd's or the Kidd family property. It also has to come out of that right-of-way entirely and be on their property.
So on that green side is where you're talking about?
Yes, if you want, I can point if it's helpful.
Just want to be sure.
So this is Inlet Dune. They have a gate here, and their dumpster is right. They've used
There is access right there now.
there's a driveway into Inlet Dunes that goes into
Don't
Inlet
go
Dunes.
all the way down to Pearson.
It does not go all the way down. In the what we would prefer is Inlet Dunes would like to be in a roundtable to discuss the narrowing of that right-of-way, to privatize it if necessary, but to narrow it all down to about 20, 25 feet so that the Kidd family has additional buildable area so that the access can go all the way through. It could relieve any whatever is going on with Mr. Steffen's property, but for the Inlet Dunes, it would put their gate out of their parking lot and closer to the entranceway. And they could center up a driveway that goes all the way down. That's the proposal that they're trying to meet. Otherwise, they will object to it because it will push everything down onto their property. So if Mr. Pearson forces an opening of that right-of-way, it will be entirely on the Inlet Dunes property.
question, how does, if Mr. Pearson were to get access to his property off Highway 98, and access has been offered, a joint access, there's already a curb cut there, okay? How does abandoning this right-of-way negatively impact your?
That's a good question.
Because what I'm seeing just from the graphic is that the only way it's going to impact them is they have to move their dumpster onto their property, and they got to take the gate off anyway. Right?
That's true. However, you're not abandoning all of the right-of-way, just the piece that's on the Kidd family,
Exactly.
if that's the
what I mean.
proposal.
Okay.
Right. But because it is a public right-of-way, open for public access and utilities, should Mr. Pearson decide to develop, they are going to, he has the right to ask it to be open across the Inlet Dunes property, Mila subdivision, which is Joey Steffen's property, all the way down, and it'll be a road for whatever residential uses that are out there, entirely on the southern 33 feet. It's we would like to point out that whatever the Kidd family chooses to do with that, there are some contingencies, and maybe they haven't looked at it, but they're not proposing a development that is going to explain how they're going to utilize access on their property. But should they decide to use residential uses on that property, when they come in off of Highway 98, the county's not going to want them to come in and turn immediately off of South Orange. They're going to want them to come down to the furthest distance, and that is still going to be a public right-of-way. So they're going to utilize the Inlet Dunes property to have a public access into their development. If it's residential, DOT's not going to want them to come off of 98. Doesn't matter if they have shared access. They're going to want them to come off of South Orange and come. That's transportation maintenance. That's something that Public Works, I've met with them several times to discuss what is the best solution. And they won't come to the meeting, and that's their choice, but that's what will happen. They will ask them, okay, if you're going to do a residential development, you're going to want to come down South Orange, and this is a public right-of-way. You're going to want to open that up and use your access that way, just like David Pearson, just like Joey Steffen. And that will be on the Inlet Dunes property.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, sir.
Ricky Whitaker, WHITAKER. And I was here for the last meeting, and I wanted to get back up and speak again, but I missed my opportunity because it got closed to the public. But several things on this property. These government patent easements were there for a purpose. I mean, that was for everyone to access through them, through the properties, adjoining properties, to get to this property, to get to the next property. This access has been there, as Mr. Theriak said, when the kids first got their government patent deed, their father did for being in the military, it was on there. However, they bought their second piece probably 10 years ago. That same easement, it was subject to that same easement. When Mr. Pearson bought his property, he talked to everyone, those government patent easements. If you start looking at these things and just saying, well, the kids or anybody else owns these easements, you need to start looking at Wall Street, Pompano Street, because the people own those streets too. And I mean, they're there for the public. And the determination of public, I mean, Mr. Pearson is the public. This is the access to his property. And those deeds are very clear in that. It's, they're for, public roadway. The unfortunate thing, I helped fill out that application. I called it a driveway because, that's all he really would like to see there. The county requires a 20-foot clearing because of the fire department. And if it needs to be a roadway, maybe Mr. Pearson will build a roadway subject to it. I mean, that would be a foolish thing just to access those few properties. I mean, but the whole thing is this is an existing access. It's not something that's, just came about recently. It's been existing. It's been in existence, and there's all kinds of different ways that this could be resolved. I mean, Melissa came up with a solution. I mean, the total reason for the kids abandoning this is to increase their building size. They still own those easements no matter what, per the deed. That's figured in your calculations for your stormwater and everything else. All that is, that doesn't change. And like Melissa just pointed out too, any development they do on that property, which the kids are not planning on doing any development, per what they said last meeting, they're going to sell the property to somebody else and let them do it. Ever who does that development, I'm willing to stake to you right now, will not use a 98 access. I don't think the county, I don't think the state will they may approve it, but they're not going to like it. They're going to want them to use an access off Orange Street because that's, Orange Street is the only intersection right there in Inlet Beach that has, a cut through where you can go north, south, east, west. And there eventually will be a red light there. Traffic backs up at red lights. You start having all these driveways cutting through where traffic's backing up, you're going to create an issue. Okay. And I mean,
I understand.
So the whole thing about this is, I'm a property rights guy. Always will be, always have been. There's ways to work around this. All Mr. Pearson wants is what he thinks what he has always had is access across this government patent easement to his property. I mean, he doesn't want to build a 66-foot road, but I mean, whatever the least impact he will go along with.
Okay.
But it's got to be approved by the county and the kids. They're not going to lose any, land, opportunity to develop their land or anything.
Someone cut their trees down.
But as I was saying, let me change subject. Yeah,
Is that right or wrong?
No, that's right. Mr. Pearson unknowingly had a drive cut through there, so I had his property listed so we could walk through there and get to it without having to pull off a 98, onto the sidewalk off 98 to show the property.
If someone cut a 30-foot wide path through the middle of your property, to the side of your property.
I would contact him.
Okay.
I mean, I would. I mean, it happened, but that's another thing about these. These easements.
Anybody have any questions for this witness?
I do. You said there's other ways to resolve this. Is this something you need to get back with Mr. Pearson and discuss?
Well, it is, but I mean, like Melissa, I mean, she would like to have, her group, because there is 66 feet there.
Well, you don't think it would have been prudent of Mr. Pearson to respond to Mr. Theriak's letter and say, let's talk about this? I mean, you've had 30 days.
Yeah, he did respond to Mr. Theriak's letter.
To say he's not interested.
Not interested in Highway 98 curb cut.
And that was the end of the conversation. Instead of, I'm not interested in a curb cut, but can we talk
Well,
about another solution?
Well, no.
I'm just saying, because you're here now wanting to delay this again.
No, I'm not wanting to delay it. I'm not wanting to delay it.
Well,
I'm just saying.
But you know, he had the opportunity.
What I'm saying is.
Out and say, listen, you're going to listen to me. I gave you a chance to talk, okay? Okay, what you're saying is he didn't want to talk until there's a possibility that he could lose his access. He was given the opportunity to discuss it with the kids. Okay, he shut that down. Instead of just saying, no, I don't want to talk about it, I'm not interested in anything, he could have said, I'm not interested in a curb cut, but can we talk about another way to resolve this problem? He chose not to do that, right? He chose not to do that.
No, he did not choose not to do that.
Okay, so he told them he would talk about another solution.
No, he responded to their letter, and their letter did not say about anything else except for him paying for a curb cut for them and him.
And he didn't respond with anything saying, no, I'm not interested in a curb cut, but if you want to talk about something else, let's talk about it. He didn't offer that, did he?
No, he did not.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Does anybody else want to talk on this item?
Can I point out something real quick? Just to note that what I'm reading in these letters, and I know everybody gets busy, but if you look at these letters, they're all dated close to the end of July. So why did we wait that long to start some communication back and forth or attempt to send these letters and all to the end of July? And this is the 8th of August, and these letters were sent at the end of July.
If I may,
Yes, sir.
I have 5 clients that own the 2 lots, and it took a couple weeks to get a consensus on what they would agree to offer. And once we got that consensus among the 5 families, the 5 family members, I provided the letter to Mr. Pearson.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Forward Dunlap and Shipman for Inlet Dunes. Just as a clarification, if your motion was
I didn't
for,
make a motion.
no, sir, from last month, I apologize. If last month's motion was for the Kidd family to negotiate with Pearson, that was not clear in either the meeting or the minutes. What I'm saying is Inlet Dunes was not contacted since last month's meeting.
Okay.
Inlet Dunes, after the last TRC and before this planning commission, had me contact all the parties to find out if we could have a meeting to get together. The Kidd family decided not to have a meeting. So when you sent them back, we anticipated that was exactly what we were going to do. We were going to get together and have a round table on the use of that easement. It's okay if they don't want to do that, we'll move forward, but we just want that on the record. We were not notified after your last meeting that there was going to be discussions. There was no discussion to be had with us. I understand it was Mr. Theriak's and the family's interpretation of your motion that they only had to negotiate with Mr. Pearson. But just for the record, we were not notified. Thank you.
Mr. Theriak, you got real quick.
With all due respect to Ms. Ward, I recall that telephone call differently. We indicated that, yes, I would want to be there, but having the right-of-way that was clear-cutted was not on the table as an option that we were willing to agree to. But we were willing to meet. This was a couple months ago. I want to kind of go to the nut here. If Mr. Pearson has access on 98, and it appears from the letter or the email that's included in our PowerPoint that FDOT has indicated that they will in fact approve a cut. We've offered to close our cut and make it a shared cut. That solves everybody's problems. Melissa's client doesn't have to worry about Mr. Pearson trying to go through the southern 33 feet. Mr. Steffen doesn't even have the ability to access the 33-foot for a driveway purpose because the board refused to allow that subdivision to have that second cut. And the Kidd family's access would be resolved. So you have a situation where FDOT has indicated that they can get a cut. We have an offer that the Kidd family still stands by, that if FDOT for some reason says no, we'll agree to the shared cut and close ours. And at the end of the day, Mr. Pearson does not have an entitlement under the patent deed for a driveway. And if the argument is that this patent deed somehow created a right in Mr. Pearson, well, your public works director said, no, you have to get authorization from the county before you have that right, and no authorization has ever been provided to have it. And then lastly, it's kind of ironic that if they're contending that this is a road that they're entitled to, then why isn't that road extended across Mr. Pearson's property? It's just on our property. So we would ask you to please approve our petition for abandonment. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Did you respond to Mr. Pearson's response?
No, I received this on Tuesday. If you continue on reading, and I didn't read the whole, the present and existing access to which we are constitutionally entitled is the access which provides the greatest value to our property and which we both deserve and intend to continue to use. Please refrain from continuing the multiple written threats that you have made to our company simply due to our previous attempts to use the existing access. Meanwhile, please accept the existing access and its associated obligations and entitlements. I didn't see an olive branch there, and I thought it would be better to address the situation here. Thank you.
Matt, can I ask you a question, Mike? Now, I know the county's official positions, we do not abandon easements. So the county is against that driveway,
That is Public Works' official response,
so he has no right to have a driveway.
that we don't abandon things typically.
Okay.
Any use of that right of way
Well,
would require a development order.
What would
Mr.
happen?
Pearson chose not to do that and moved forward with opening this up to enhance his opportunity to sell the real estate. Without any permits, without any permission, he just went across the two neighboring lots and opened it up.
What would happen if he continues to use it like that?
I would expect additional code enforcement action.
Is there anybody here representing Mr. Pearson?
Mr. Whitaker.
Are you his representative? Okay. So you're not speaking for yourself? Okay. That's all I want to know.
In fact, when Mr. Steffen attempted to develop the Mallow Beach property and use that access, all of the adjoining neighbors objected to that.
So if the county closes that up where he cannot use it, he'll have to have a curb cut.
Yes.
Well,
Is
And he
correct.
doesn't have the authority to use that
No,
today.
Not have the authority to use that without a development order. We have no development order application that I'm aware of.
okay. That's all I'm.
Filed with Walton County Planning.
Let me ask you, Mac, this one of those is hard because I can see both sides. However, I completely disagree with someone going on somebody else's property and assuming that they have the right to just cut right on through there and use it. Because it's not a driveway, and that's essentially what this is. But abandoning an easement is also tough, because there's some valid points to where if somebody wants to develop some of those properties, they're gonna have to have access.
And the board denied Mr., the Mallow Beach developers' request to use that access when the Mallow Beach project came before them.
When was that?
Oh, I don't recall exactly. It was in the
Roughly.
last 4 or 5 years.
So the board denied the use of that easement.
For the Mallow Beach development.
Is that the same thing we're talking about now with Mr. Pearson, the same piece of property?
That's the southern portion of that easement. But he was proposing to open up, as I recall, a roadway that would center on that easement.
Okay. Do you remember why they denied that? I don't know if you can remember back up. far enough.
Strong objection from the condominium association that Melissa represents,
Okay.
and objection from the Kidd family at the time.
So everybody was opposed to it.
Yes.
And it's likely then that should Mr. Pearson apply for development order to build something on that property again and intend to use that right-of-way to access it, what would happen?
He certainly has the right to make that application. I would expect the Board of County Commissioners would make the final decision. I can't presuppose what they
Right,
would do.
but based on their
I can only
previous
share
action.
what they previously did in this location.
Right.
We have a different board now than we did when that project came through. Not exactly the same set of board members,
Different set of
but
board
we can never presuppose what that
Right,
board's
I
action
understand.
might be.
I understand. I'm just trying to figure out why they would say no. I can't understand why they would deny it.
I think it was largely the objections from the owners at the time, and there was an alternate access on the southern portion of Mr. Stevens' property.
Where was that? Was it on 98?
No, it's,
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, couple of things. See both sides as well. I think it's definitely wrong for him to go in and open that driveway up. And I think that's a civil issue and certainly not something for this board to get involved in, whether it be enforcement action from the county or a civil issue for a judge to decide. Not my decision in any way, and I would never want to get involved in that. I see his point, but I also know that what the county's point, Public Works, and their point is about abandoned driveways or right-of-ways. And if we set precedent on this board by abandoning right-of-ways unless there's good reason that it interferes with a county's business that we've done before on one, then we're gonna have everybody coming up here wanting to abandon right-of-ways. There's a lot of right-of-ways in this county. So if we're gonna abandon a right-of-way just because these folks can't agree on it, we're setting ourselves up for hearing a lot of right-of-way abandonments. So again, I think it's a civil issue. It could be. Anything can be a civil issue. So, and let a judge maybe decide that, but I certainly don't want to get involved in a decision on that.
Make a motion.
Well, I'd just like to say that, there is a method to get that thing abandoned. That's get a development order. Am I right? If he wanted to do it, he's got to get a development order and it has to be approved.
the abandonment would not be affected by a development order. It's a petition for abandonment, which is
Petition,
before
right. So
us
that
tonight.
would be the
To
step.
use it would require a development order.
Right.
Right, but that would be his first step towards that.
You get a development order, which could give him access through there.
Which would allow him to improve the easement
Okay.
for
and this-
access.
Yeah, no, I agree, it's very aggressive to cut 30-foot right, just on your own.
Yeah.
And there is a way that he can start doing that, is by what you just said.
Mr. Harper, you got anything?
I'm reading this letter from, if not, where it says, that the property cannot meet the access management standards for connection as set forth herein is eligible to be permitted by the department. Does eligible mean it's guaranteed, or he's eligible to apply?
You can ask for it.
So that concerns me that, say we abandon it, but then he goes, applies, and the state says no to him.
Well, I think that was all a part of the offer of the kids to allow that curb cut that's already there to be moved over, to split the property.
Yeah, and I
But
saw that letter, but
Yeah, but I mean, that's a whole separate issue. But
right,
That was part of that.
putting the whole burden of that cost on to that
Yeah, yeah.
property owner, I think I wouldn't respond either.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we would request that the offer for the shared access, if we're able to get a recommendation of approval, be one of the conditions of the motion.
Okay.
So that it's not just a offer that we made, but it's a binding condition of your recommendation.
I understand.
Thank you.
And we're going to close public comments. We've got everything. Mr. Roberts, what are your thoughts? Any? Mm-hmm.
When did they buy it? What did they know when they bought it?
I don't either. Mr. Barker makes some very valid points, so. Probably the only time, probably the only time this month we'll say that.
I will make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to deny the abandonment of that easement.
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second, any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, and the motion is to not deny the abandonment. Say aye.
Can I ask one more question
Sure.
Matt, before we do that? It is the county's position, if I understand it correctly, that the county will not support absent a unique circumstance.
The Public Works typically does not support an abandonment of any kind of a public interest in the right-of-way. The Planning Department does not take a position on abandonments. No, sir, you cannot.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
It was.
Mr. Chairman, this item will move forward to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for denial
Correct.
if the applicant wishes to move to the next step.
Robert, can you check to see if your mic's on? Finder.
Next item, Mr. Carpenter.
Oh, actually,
Okay.
legislative, all of them.
All of them are legislative.
Thank you, sir. That moves us to item number 2 on our agenda tonight. The Seascape Resorts Incorporated Development of Regional Impact Notice of Proposed Change. This is a request to approve by ordinance. It's been reviewed by Renee Bradley. Seascape Resort LLC is requesting approval to amend the Seascape Resorts Development of Regional Impact by removing 1.44 acres, parcel N, from the DRI of approximately 238 acres with a future land use of mixed use and official zoning of coastal center. No other changes are proposed to this DRI other than the removal of the 1.44 acres. The project's located east of Holiday Road and south of US 98. And internally right on Seascape Drive, as identified by parcel numbers in the package. The applicant is here and is prepared to present their case.
All right.
Thank you, guys, for being here. I appreciate you being serving on the Planning Commission. It's a fairly simple application, but there are some implications I want to go through with you. We're asking if the property, as you can see, is located in the northwest corner, the very northwest corner of the DRI. It is 1.44 acres. There's currently no access within the DRI to this property, just so that's clear, first of all. Secondly,
we're asking to remove it from the DRI for the purposes of constructing a commercial development that will front 98. I will tell you whether it's removed from the DRI or not removed from the DRI, we intend on developing the property as a commercial development at some point. The original application was accompanied with a letter from me saying that it was going to be a hotel. We've been doing a feasibility study for a hotel for some time. But frankly, we're not entirely sure that this parcel is going to work for a hotel, but it will be some sort of commercial development that is allowed within the coastal center district. So why would we want to remove it from the DRI? It's a fairly simple analysis. If we remove it from the DRI, the advantage to the residents and the owners of the DRI is that the DRI grandfathers in certain development standards, okay? So if we take it out of the DRI, then we're subject to the Land Development Code and the Comprehensive Plan as it exists today. That's significantly more restrictions on development than would take place in the DRI. For instance, there's buffering restrictions, there's setback restrictions, there's lighting restrictions, there's landscaping requirements that are not required if we develop it within the DRI. So it will be a development that has significant buffering setback that may or may not occur if we developed it within the DRI. So in our opinion, it's an advantage to the residents and owners within the DRI that it be taken out of the DRI and be developed along Highway 98 as a commercial development. Secondly, or thirdly, the property, there was some email we saw that somebody stated that this would be intended at some point to be used as residential development. I will tell you, there is no economic viability to making this piece of property, this 1.44 acres, some kind of residential development. It will be developed as commercial property at some point, okay?
Question, I don't mean to get you off track, but
Sure.
why would you take on additional standards?
Well, and the flip side, the advantage to us, which was, I was getting there slowly.
Sorry,
I was getting there slowly, but the flip side is if we develop it outside the DRI, we don't draw down any of our commercial square footage. That's what we are getting, but what we're giving up is pretty significant restrictions on the development. One of the big ones, by the way, and I confirmed this with Renee this afternoon, if we develop it within the DRI, we will have to provide, and most likely from the county and from the Department of Transportation, inter-DRI connectivity to this commercial parcel. And I don't think anybody wants that, and I know we don't want it. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us.
What you're saying there, Mark, is that there's going to be no access from Highway 98. It has to come from inside the DRI.
I'm not saying it's an absolute, but it's entirely possible, if not likely. Yes.
Okay.
Parcel is Acme Oyster House, and we're talking about this parcel.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Acme Oyster House sits here, and that other parcel sits right
Yes, sir, it would be west of that.
half a mile.
And I do have Mr. Nettles here, half a mile, yeah. I do have Mr. Nettles here to answer any questions you have. He's the manager of the DRI. But that's basically what we're asking to do. It's a fairly simple thing. Mac called it NOPC just for legal purposes. There's really no such thing as NOPC anymore. It's really an amendment to the original development order. Oh, and one last thing, and just so we're clear, there are no current intensities or designations of use for this property within the DRI. Also, the removal of this 1.44 acres does not draw down any open space. All of that is associated with other parcels within the DRI. And also, just so we're clear, we can move uses within the DRI. Of course, we have to come to the board to some extent, but we can move uses within the DRI. So just make sure everybody's clear on that. If you have any questions, Mr. Nettles here to answer. He's more than happy to answer them.
Commissioners, any questions?
I think Mark answered the only one I have. Why would they take on more than they had to?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Mr. Nettles, you have anything you want to add?
I'm Jay Nettles, speaking for Seascape Resort. Part of the motivation for this in this time frame is the fact that this parcel is separated from Highway 98 by a narrow strip of land, 50 feet wide, that's not owned by us, but we have that parcel under contract. So the idea would be to combine the two together, which that 50-foot parcel lies entirely within the Gulf Power right-of-way, so it can't be It can be no vertical development on there, but it can be used for ingress and egress off of Highway 98, and also it could be used for parking. So that was, the availability of that parcel is what motivated was a motivating factor in deciding to develop this as a commercial development.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
It's one that I'm reading off of, I think just about every one of these letters that are attached here that, asking us to deny this. How does removing, or how could removing this 1.44 acres from the DRA make it less likely that the owners will ever get control of their HOA?
It really has no impact on
I
that.
have.
It has no impact on it. There's in the DRI, the threshold is when the property is 90% developed residentially, then turnover would occur at that point. And so this doesn't change.
Actually, it would speed that up if you're removing space from the DRI.
No, but it's based on the number of RDUs.
Okay.
So there's a total of 2,500 RDUs in the DRI, and currently there are 1,332 units on the property. So there's a significant amount of future residential development that'll take place.
And this 1.44 acres is insignificant.
It has no bearing on turnover whatsoever.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Nettles?
This property that you're buying,
Yes,
there's nothing between it and 98.
correct.
Okay, just looking at the map, and it's just showing a road, sort of, is that?
Right, there's DOT right of way in there, but there's no,
No development,
no.
okay.
And again, I think, some of the opposition to this is based on an assumption that the property would remain undeveloped if it were not removed from the DRI. And that's not likely. So it's a developable piece of property. We have the ability to relocate density on the resort, and it's likely that this parcel would be developed either way.
Okay. Anybody else? All right.
One dumb question, maybe it's just logistical, and maybe trouble reconciling these two. Burdens if you could develop it the way you want. I guess I'm not smart enough to be able to understand this.
Well, it's the same answer I
Change
gave.
it, same analysis?
Right, it's the same answer I gave. Yeah.
All right. We're going to open up public comments and we'll go through the list here. Mr. Fred Tricker.
Thank you. Been looking at this for the last few days, and there's some things I don't understand about it. And one of the things relates to what you were just talking about in terms of commercial intensity, is that basically we don't know what's going to be developed on this 1.44 acre parcel. It's going to be some kind of commercial. Was going to be a hotel, maybe not a hotel, maybe it is. Maybe it's a bar, nightclub, maybe it's a strip club, I don't know. Doesn't matter, but let's say, just for the sake of argument, that it's 50,000 square feet of commercial development. Well, the original DRI allows for 176,000 square feet of commercial, and that's all for the entire parcel. So if you get 50,000 over here on this other parcel, in addition to the 176, you got a big increase in the amount of commercial development. And I would think that the people that live in that area might not be too happy about that. So I don't get the concept. So I understand there's a trade-off in terms of requiring the 1.44 acre parcel to be developed using current standards with regard to buffer and everything. But I mean, that's potentially a lot of added commercial development that is not in the current DRI. So I just don't think, I just don't think that's right. It's gonna be developed for commercial one way or the other, whether it's in or out of the DRI, is what I just heard. And if it's gonna be in the DRI, then they gotta meet that 176,000 square foot, total, entitlement. Shouldn't use the word entitlement. I know you don't like that. Authorization.
Yeah, I mean, no, it is what it is. I mean, yeah, okay.
Okay, so the other issue is that, this is coming before us tonight without the benefit of having gone through a technical review committee hearing. It's not been to the public, and I guess I don't understand that. It's not a less than minor development. It's not a minor development. It's a major development order application, and that requires a technical review committee hearing. I'm not aware of anything in the code that allows you to bypass that step. So if there's something there, I'd love to know about it.
Get those questions answered for you, Mr. Tricker.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis, you make note of those questions?
Yes, sir.
Let's just answer them all at the end, okay? 'Cause we got several people want to speak.
Okay, so that also relates to the other issue, is that because there was no technical review committee meeting, people were not aware of this until the last minute. And I congratulate the applicant on running it through the system, getting all their notices out just in time for everything they had to do. But here's what happened, is that the notices, the certified mail notices went out on July the 26th. The community meeting was held on August the 5th. Today's what, the 8th? Planning meetings today. BCC meeting is scheduled for August the 13th. That's like a 2-week process. I mean, for something that, for a major development order, typically takes a couple months, 2 or 3 months. And it's really, really tough on the community, the people that live there who just heard about this. They didn't have any opportunity to hear about it before now. And after over a 2-week period of time, they're required to get their resources together, get their act together. It's not fair to them. It's not really, it doesn't give them their process, their due process that's embedded into the land development code. So I guess that's a big concern that I have. So I guess that's the main thing really, is just giving those folks an opportunity. The other side question is, how does it get on the BCC meeting agenda? It's on the agenda's published, and it hasn't gone through the planning commission yet.
We'll get that answered. I can't answer that.
I
I don't know what the county's process is. I think they try to plan ahead.
Is there a precedent for that? I mean, normally.
Yes, yeah.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, they plan them out, because whether we recommend approval or denial, it don't matter, it still can go.
well, that's true. That's true.
Basically, Fred, we don't mean nothing. It's just a step on the ladder to get there, so.
Yeah, you're a little bit too humble there, I think.
No, I mean, so, yeah, it would go forward to the BCC
Right,
regardless of what our recommendation.
potentially.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
okay?
Yeah, thank you very
We'll
much.
get Mr. Davis to answer the rest of the questions at the end when we wrap up, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Rick, were you here for the SWCC, or you lived there? I don't, oh, just, you still on that?
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't say anything about it. I don't live in that neighborhood. I'm representing SWCC, and I'm supporting the neighborhood group that's started to take a look at this.
Betsy Mooneyham? Did I get that right? All right.
My name is Betsy Mooneyham, and I am a resident at Seascape Resort. Been living there with my family since 1976. So before SRI landed there, we have been there a long time, and Seascape is a lovely resort. SRI has pulled at least a dozen changes to the DRI in the recent past since they took over. I don't know why all these changes are being passed, except I think part of it is that they slide these meetings in and they don't tell us about them. I never received my letter certified telling me that this meeting was going on. I happened to see a sign and I talked to my neighbors. Seascape Resort has tried to pull fast ones before, and they've gotten away with it. And they're trying to pull another fast one. The people who live there at that corner do not want this. It will take out all of the trees that serve as a very good buffer. They've already taken out some trees at our expense, the homeowners. And if they do take the rest of this and develop this 1.4 acres, we don't know what they're going to put there. And pulling out of the DRI means that they don't have to put this toward the total build-out and drag their feet again and again change their DRI, and they will do it again and again and again, as they've done over the years. And it's time that we put a stop to it. He says that you can't put any vertical on this 1.4 acres, they can't put any vertical building on there. He's not going to build anything there unless you allow him to buy the other parcel and give him this to just tear down all the trees back there and ruin the neighborhood, because Golden Pond is a very quiet neighborhood. And SRI, what they do control at Seascape, they don't take care of. They have certain roads and parking lots and buildings, and they are in a shambles. What they call the conference center, where Jay Nettles works, is rat infested, and I can't believe that they haven't shut that down and condemned it. The parking lot there has potholes on it. The main road that goes from Highway 98 into Seascape belongs to SRI. They will not pave it. They refuse. They say, oh, we have big plans for later, but we can't tell you what they are. But they won't pave it. They have a maintenance area that also is just ridiculous. We rent our units. We live there full time. We care about Seascape. And he won't take care of what he does own at Seascape. Why, he's not going to take care of this either. Please do not allow this change to the DRI again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. John Kinney? Anne Marie Moore. Susan Buckaloo.
Betsy and Fred have covered most of what I have to say, but I live directly below on the south edge of this parcel. And when I bought it 3 years ago, it was because of the quietness of the neighborhood. And if that disappears and my property value goes down, I'm not going to be a very happy camper. And that's all I've got to say.
Can I ask you a question real quick? What would happen if we do nothing and they can develop something there anyway?
That's a good question.
I mean, and I'm not just saying that to be a smart aleck, because we don't approve anything to begin with, okay? We just make a recommendation. But if the BCC approves this and they fall under the new code, you would be much better off if they build something there because of the required buffers and the things that they have to do, okay?
If those buffers happen, that would be good.
They would have to happen. Well, they would have to happen. Okay, that's not a if. They're required to. If the BCC denies this and they develop it, there doesn't have to be any buffer. They can do whatever they want to do. And you may even have a lot more traffic coming through your neighborhood because they'll have to have interconnectivity to be able to get to whatever they do there. I mean, so those are also just something I want you to think about, because there are positives and negatives to both sides, but as far as for where you live, it could be a much more negative thing to do nothing.
Okay.
Do you understand that?
Well, I'm a fairly new homeowner.
Right.
And I've spent a good chunk of the last 3 years learning the hard way what a developer-controlled HOA board is.
I completely.
And you know, my realtor certainly didn't explain that to me when I purchased.
Call me, but that's another point.
Okay. In other words, you know, I take it upon myself that I didn't do the research that I needed to do.
I'm just kidding. I don't sell down here.
Okay.
I was just trying to make it funny. But what I'm saying is, there are consequences both ways.
Right.
And what's important to understand is this particular item, what they're trying to do now, from where you live and from your perspective, would probably be better for you, because you're going to have a buffer. Okay, if it's a part of the DRI, that requirement is gone. Okay? Because it's a part of the DRI and they don't have to meet today's standards. As I understand it, maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I believe.
Right, and I haven't done a research on the difference between the standards.
I can understand the concern of drawing down commercial space and not drawing down commercial space. That makes a lot of sense. But I just want to make sure from where you tell me you live, you understand that by saying no, it could have a more negative impact on you directly, on your parcel land.
I'd be interested to know if you are the affected homeowner that we're talking about right now. I'd be interested to know if that sort of information does change your analysis or how you feel about the project. I can see on your face, maybe you're a little bit more conflicted than when you stepped up, but we don't live there, so we don't know.
I don't live
We're
there.
asking the questions that I think.
I live in
right now it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's very quiet.
But
There
you
has been
understand-
some housing built on the west border that has ripped out some of the tree line along the road. And I'm concerned about that too. I would like to see our HOA replace some of that vegetation. But
I think what we're talking about, nobody operates in a vacuum. If we pull one thing, another thing's going to move. I understand that too. But I think Teddy's made a very erudite point, which is, in your case, when you stepped up here, you were vehemently against this as an idea. And I think now that maybe some of the facts have been fleshed out a little bit for you, does that change your analysis as an affected homeowner? Because a lot of times, and what we see up here is that developers generally take the beatings because they are the money men, and that's a reasonable analysis sometimes. But in my analysis, I'm looking at it just like Teddy is going, you might be getting an assurance of future comfort rather than, they can just do whatever they want with it.
I'm just here to learn. And, until I see actual drawings, it's really hard to envision what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And we suffer that same conflict too, so don't think we don't.
Okay.
I guess what he's asking, and I'm just curious, is your perspective on, I'm assuming it's a wooded area back there.
Right. It's like a
Okay,
totally
quiet,
residential, quiet area back there.
Now, if this gets denied and the developer says, you know what, we have to do something there, so we're going to build a hotel, okay? They can go back there and cut every one of them trees down, build a hotel, and there's nothing between where you live today and that hotel, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If this were approved and they decide they're going to build a hotel there, what's the buffer requirements? They have
20
to have
feet.
a minimum 20-foot buffer, significant buffer between what's there currently and what's being built anew. You understand that?
Mm-hmm.
And 20 feet may not sound like a lot, but 20 feet of trees can be significant when you're talking about noise reduction.
Right.
Like,
Change if that's preservation land too? Doesn't that establish a longer or more distant buffer, Mac?
so, I'm just trying to be clear because I want to know your perspective as someone who lives right there, okay? Because there's two very different things that could happen. And one could give you some comfort in knowing that some of your peace and quiet could be maintained. And the other way, it could completely destroy your way of life.
Right.
That makes a difference, right?
As a homeowner, you're aware when you buy
Right.
into a neighborhood, especially in an area like this that's growing, constantly, that, change is going to happen.
Right.
But doesn't mean you can just go ahead and stick your head in the sand, not be aware of how it's going to affect you.
Absolutely. All right,
Okay.
well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Chairman, could we ask Ms. Mooneyham the same thing?
Maybe if it changes her
Does
analysis.
that
to hear
change your,
Ms. Mooneyham, would you step back up real quick?
And listen, you don't have to answer. Nobody's
Yeah, you don't
compelling
have
you
to.
to. Just
Sure.
we're
Just
wondering
curious.
if that changes your analysis, hearing that sort of.
Not really, because they've already said that they can't go vertical. And if they don't buy this additional piece of property that would be for the parking lot, there won't be enough parking. And so I don't think that property is going to be used for anything. I think this
What you
is
meant
all
by you can't go vertical is that
part of
on
the
that
shell
narrow
game.
strip that's like a billboard strip.
the adjacent property,
Well-
not on the 1.44.
Okay,
That's
so
on
that's
the
different.
place
Okay.
they're trying to buy.
So this is gonna be designated commercial if it comes out, okay?
And it can be designated commercial on the inside. You don't need anything. You can just do
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I understand. Maybe that's the question I was asking you earlier, was I don't understand why you'd want to do this. Now I think it makes sense why you want to do this a little bit more.
Explain it to me.
Well, I'm gonna try my best, but I'm gonna leave it to him, and I'll tell you what I think he's telling you, and I'm gonna do a very poor job of it, okay? What he's saying is, it is better for them to pull it out of the DRI as it currently sits, because that allows them to separate and not have to bring more traffic through the neighborhood. It also imposes on them the current restrictions from the Land Development Code, which would put you in a position as a homeowner, an affected homeowner, to not have that traffic passing through, and it puts more restrictions on them as far as the buffers that they'd have to use and the different Land Development Code portions that would affect them. So what it actually does is it really burdens them with coming compliant with the new register or the new legislations. And what it does for you is it keeps the cars out of your neighborhood. That's what I understand them to
Hey,
say.
John, why would they do this? They aren't nice
I've
people.
asked that
Let me
question
ask
100
you,
times.
I think part of that, and they can finish answering it, is buying this other strip that adjoins it and adjoining it with this parcel will allow them to do a lot more in total. Right there.
And I
Okay?
think they don't want this to count toward the build-out, and
Well,
that's what everybody's kind of
give me-
overlooking.
Okay, give me a chance, okay? Give me a
Yes,
chance.
of course, Mr. Stewart.
Because yeah, I agree, and we're gonna get there, all right? But I think the question really becomes, for them, is the benefit, because then they can join these two parcels and do a more significant development.
And they're right off 98.
And they're right off of Highway 98, okay? The negative to them is, by doing this, they're subjecting themselves to significantly more restrictions and protections for the neighboring property owners, okay? If they don't do it, they can still build on this parcel. They just can't adjoin it with that strip they're trying to acquire on Highway 98, okay? So that's the difference for them. They
Right.
can add that additional parcel. It doesn't change what they can do on this parcel, though, because they can still build up here.
But it would not be connected to 98.
All that traffic would have to come through the DRI. And that's where it will be negative for the people who live inside.
Oh, it already is negative.
But can you imagine that much more traffic?
We just have to have another guard gate and
But
all
I'm
of
just
that.
saying.
Yes, I know, I'm with you.
There's trade-offs. And while it's not perfect either way, people like the lady who was just up here,
Susan,
I think for her, what could happen today would be much worse than what could happen in the future if this were approved. It would have a much more negative impact on her.
I just think they will build somewhere else instead of there.
I don't disagree with you there.
That's what I think
I
would
understand
happen.
what-
They just don't want to have
Understand what
these
you
count
think.
toward the total build-out with commercial or residential.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michael Scott,
Actually, may I say one more thing? Just real brief.
real briefly.
I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to stand up here, both
Yeah,
of you, and
absolutely.
answer questions, because you're not on trial. Nobody's asking you to answer these questions, and I know it's
It
very difficult
is
to stand
hard.
up there. But it helps us. Well, it really does help us, because at any general level, we come at this trying to do the right thing. But when you help us walk through the analysis, it helps us figure out what's good for the community, what's good for the developer, and what's good for the HOA. And I understand that there seems to be some animosity between you and the HOA. I'm sure that there are some parts of it that are well-founded and some that maybe might be personal. But for us, it helps us to be able to walk through it and go, well, what if we do this, and what if we tweak that, and what if we do this? Because the lawyers in the room kind of have charging orders, and they have to do what they have to do, and the clients want them to do something. It helps us to be able to say, well, what do you think about this, and how can we maneuver this, and what if we tweak this? I do want to tell you how much we appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk to us and listen, and not just come up here and give us 2 minutes of your absolute worst and then sit back down. So it is helpful. Please. Thank you. I'm done now.
You're not billing by the hour here, John, okay?
Well, I'm billing somebody. I just got to figure out who it is. It's probably me.
Yeah, but we are. Keep talking, John.
Michael Scott,
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, thank you for your time. I'd like to focus my comments differently than I originally planned to talk about two things. First of all, the concept that this property will be developed commercially somehow if it stays in the DRI doesn't bother me. I mean, that's their right. If they own the property, they can do that. I don't think, if you've been back there, it's realistic to think someone's going to drive all the way through Seascape to buy their groceries or something. I think it's a fairly low likelihood that property is going to just attract this massive amount of traffic. So that doesn't really bother me. Second of all, what really concerns me is I don't think we're looking at the ecosystem as a whole. We're now saying that there's 1.44 acres that will develop commercially that are not part of that are going to be taken out of the DRI. That means somewhere else in the DRI, there's going to be more commercial development. So the net impact, to the whole ecosystem is more commercial development, which is to our disadvantage, the 1,332 owners and people like myself who are year-round residents. Secondly, most of you, if not all of you, probably own property somewhere, maybe a house, condo, townhouse, and when people start snipping away something that you've bought in good faith, I think you could see the concerns with that. That now all of a sudden it's 1.4 acres here. We don't know what's going to be next. I'm sure if you ask SRI, they'll say nothing, but I'm not sure that's really the case. So I would just ask you to look at the fact that this increases the commercial development within that property as defined today. It is a disadvantage to us. We personally, most of us do not believe that a large-scale, high-traffic commercial development could take place without access from 98. And I don't think this is good for the citizens of this property, and I don't think it's good for the citizens of Walton County to see that ratio change unfairly. Now, I've also recognized that you folks want to, do the right thing and try to be fair. So my thought, just sitting back there, and sometimes that's a dangerous thing to do, to think on your feet, is okay, if you want to develop that commercially, take it out of DRI, have the advantage of buying a second property, have at it. But as part of the motion, make it that square footage that's developed counts against their quota. And I think that would probably make a lot of people feel pretty good. But it has to be conditional and it has to be in the proposal. I mean, that's kind of where I'm thinking.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before you go, Mr. Scott, if I'm reading your,
Remember, he's working with the lawyers by the hour here.
don't make me come for that gavel. Just one of the things that you wrote in your letter says, selling off a parcel that has the potential to add over 100 units to the community an inch closer to being fully developed is a very bad arrangement for the owners. That's something I've seen a couple of times. Would you mind addressing that?
I did not hear you again, I'm sorry.
You want me to just come right to it?
No, just yell.
It says, selling off a parcel that has the potential to add over 100 units to the community an inch closer to being fully developed is a bad arrangement for the owners. That's what I remember seeing in your
Well, yes, sir, and they've even indicated the potential for approximately that many hotel rooms. I mean, that's an approximation. I mean, it conceivably could be residentially developed, absolutely.
Mark, would you mind addressing that?
Well, yes, so that parcel will never be developed as residential.
So it can never count against that
Right,
2250?
the turnover happens at 90% of the residential.
Okay, but it can never be part of the,
Is there a physical reason for that, or is that just a strategic reason?
No, it's economic. It makes
Okay,
absolutely no economic sense.
So I challenge that can't be developed. They may not want to develop it because they're not going to make a lot of money off it, but it could be developed at some point in the future for residential.
right, though, right?
It could be developed as residential, they just prefer not to, and that's a very different place.
Thank you.
No, I would respectfully disagree.
Well, we'll get there, but for purposes right now,
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. Brian Sims.
Good evening, Commissioners. I represent a group of 25 owners for two pieces of property that are adjacent to the acres the SRI wants to remove from the DRI. And if it does not get approved, it will never be a commercial back there. It's a scare tactic against the homeowners, in my opinion. Our groups are like many of the property owners that surround this parcel. We're scattered across the country and do not have the ability to make it into town to oppose this request. SRI knows this and is trying to take advantage of that. Despite the short notice given for this request by SRI, our owners are adamantly opposed to the removal of the land from the DRI. Please amend this matter for a reasonable amount of time, 60 or 90 days, to allow property owners time to organize and determine if hiring legal counsel is a desired option. The notice we were given might be the minimum amount required under the statutes, but it is totally inadequate. SRI wants to build more commercial square footage than was originally permitted in the Seascape Developmental Plan. You should not let them break from the master plan, one they agreed to. The purpose of a developmental plan is to determine the full extent and limits of the commercial and residential development on the entire property. The plan takes into account green space to development ratios and buffers. Removing acres from that plan for the purpose of developing it is counter to the intent of the plan this county commission already approved. During a Monday Q&A meeting with an SRI representative, it was apparent they were not prepared for the impact of this development would have on the adjacent property. They stated the development has to be 25 feet away from the property line, but they would not quickly identify where that is. After determining the line would be the road, it became apparent they have not physically been out there to look at the tree line to see what 25 feet from the road looks like and what trees would be left to protect existing properties from the sound and light from US Highway 98. At one point, they said they were going off satellite view of the tree line. Highway 98 is a federal highway, and when the renovation is done, drivers are going to be doing 60 and 70 miles per hour down the road. If they take down the trees, we need to be assured that they are not violating federal law with noise abatement. Has anyone looked at the sound abatement laws? Has anyone done sound abatement tests with a 6 to 8 lane highway? The trees are the best sound barrier out there. Many years ago, Okaloosa County decided to take the approach of approving everything under the sun, in my opinion, and they are now paying for it. Walden County was tighter with their restrictions, and because of that, I hear more and more people are bringing their tourist dollars here to the more peaceful beaches of South Walden. While we realize that SRI is in the business to make a profit in their investment of Seascape, as homeowners, we also have an investment, and this will hurt our investment in Walden County. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anne Marie Moore. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That's everybody who has signed up to speak. Is there anybody else who wishes to address this item? Okay, we'll close public comments. Mark, do you want to?
Yes, sir. First, to Mr. Tricker's comments, this is not a development order request. That comes much later. This is not a development order request. It's a legislative item. It's technically an amendment to the DRI ordinance. So TRC is not required. What would the TRC review? So it is a simple change, a legislative item to change the ordinance. There's 103,000 square feet of commercial entitlements left in the DRI. I tried to be just as transparent about this as I could at the beginning. The trade-off is pretty simple. We're not drawing that down, but we're building a much more restricted development on this property. That's the trade-off. I didn't try to hide that ball. We're not going to draw it down if we do this. Also, when the development order request comes, to the last gentleman's point, you will see the barriers, the setbacks, if there's preservation involved, that could be more than 25 feet. You're going to see the vegetation plan. You're going to see the lighting plan. That's much later down the road. And the TRC will review that. And so there will be plenty of public opportunity to comment on those items. I want to be clear that we have absolutely complied with the notice requirement. We didn't try to speed through anything. There's no TRC requirement. We sent the certified letters out on as required by the code. I know when I sat in Hayward's seat, I was a bit of a jerk about that. So I make sure that we comply completely with the code as it relates to notice. So we're certainly not trying to pull any kind of fast one. I've been very transparent about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what the trade-offs are. And quite frankly, I think the trade-off we're giving up is pretty significant. It will cost us a heck of a lot more money to build under the current land development code than it would if we build in the DRI standard that we have, significantly more. And quite frankly, we won't be able to build as much because there's certain limitations on floor area ratios, for instance, that we wouldn't have in the DRI. So that's a pretty significant give up. I think the buffer's 25 feet. Am I wrong? 20. Okay, we had in our head it was 25. So there's going to be a buffer. And let me say why I said I disagreed with this idea that we could develop it as residential. We just choose not to. If you can't afford it, you can't do it. You couldn't sell that property at a rate economically that would make sense to build residential there. It's not feasible. It wouldn't work in the long run. So Unless you have any questions, unless Jay has anything else to add, that's all.
I do have a question.
Sure.
And I guess it's going back to the capacity. If something's built on that corner there, how much commercial space do you expect that would be?
I haven't done the math. Have you done the math?
Since we don't know exactly what it is, small piece of property, it's 1.44 acres.
I've seen a lot go on 1.44 plus the other piece you're gonna add to it.
But it's gotta include, it's gotta have stormwater retention, on-site, self-contained, plus parking.
If you build a hotel there, how big a hotel do you think you could build?
Well, what we looked at, we could fit
How much space would that be, square foot?
I don't know.
Safe to say 50,000?
I don't think it was near that much.
I'm just curious. I mean, there's gotta be a number that you could come up with. I mean, you do this for a living. So.
If it's a multi-story building, it,
I understand we're not here for development order, okay? And I'm not trying to force you to tell me exactly what you're gonna do. But at some point, common sense tells everybody in this room something's going to be built there if we do this. And you have an idea of what that might be. And you have an idea of how much space that's going to be, how many square feet. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have some idea.
Well, quite frankly, when we started the whole process, it was going to be a hotel. We were looking at 100 to 125 unit hotel.
Okay, Mark, and how much?
Quite frankly, I don't know. I don't remember what the square footage was on the feasibility.
I mean, somebody has to have some idea.
I just don't remember.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw out 40,000 square feet, okay? I see their point on, you're trying to separate this because you don't want to draw down that commercial square footage out of the DRI. To me, that's a very valid point, because you're adding commercial square footage to the same footprint.
Well, let me, I don't mean to interrupt, but let me.
I mean, is that true or not?
It is true, and I said that at the very beginning, just so
Right, I
we're clear. But the flip side again is, we're subjecting ourselves to a very, very different development standard.
And I agree with that.
And one other thing too, just, now heck, I lost my train of thought, but, yeah, we're subjecting ourselves to a very, 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 very different development standard that we would not be subjected to if it was in the DRI. Oh, I don't know what I was gonna say. And we're only talking, remember, this is a 200, the last number I saw is 230 acre development. We're talking 1.44 acres.
Well, I understand that.
It's not a significant impact on the size.
Well, I think, Mark, it's significant in the commercial space added.
It
And
could
I think
be.
that,
It could be, depending on the size of the development turns out. But we could build it much larger with no standards inside.
I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I mean, I know you can. I'm just trying to put it in perspective for myself.
Oh, I understand. But again, I don't want to think
I don't
anybody,
want to.
we were trying to hide that ball.
I see
We
your
weren't.
hand. The public comments are closed. Okay, so we can't take any more.
Any other
I'm
questions
sorry
for me?
about
Oh,
that.
no.
No, that's all right.
Or Jay or me.
I have a question.
Sure.
Say it goes up to the BCC and they say no. What type of viable commercial project could you build there that you'd have to route people through the neighborhood to get to it?
Let me say two things. One, the idea that we couldn't buy the property, combine them, and develop it is not true. We still could do that. I just said that's true. I don't know the exact answer to the question, but I'll tell you, we will be required, whatever the commercial development is, we will be required to have cross-access within the DRI. That's just going to be a requirement from DOT and the
There'll
county.
be interconnectivity.
Absolutely.
Regardless.
If it's part of the DRI.
Now, the extent of the traffic, I have no idea. That depends on what's built. But yes, there will be interconnectivity.
On that parcel map right there, show me an entrance from the parcel in question. Entrance into
There
the
is
development.
Oh, the development itself?
Yes.
And that's the only entrance.
That is from 98, that's correct.
Right, it goes all the way through to.
To scenic.
All to get people to come in off
else have any questions for Mark or comment?
Thank you, and thank you for your question.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to make the point, it's correct that if we separate this out, then we're not drawing down the commercial density in the DRI. But we're speaking about commercial as if it's a detriment somehow, as if we want as little of it, as if the homeowners would prefer to have as little commercial as possible. And I just want to make the point that the commercial that we've developed so far, a shopping center at the entrance with some restaurants and entertainment and that kind of thing, I think is viewed, predominantly by homeowners as being a benefit. So they have places to go eat without getting out on the highway. We're trying to provide shopping and dining and entertainment on the resort that will enable people to avoid getting out in all the traffic. So to some extent, I think we're looking, some people look at it as, well, the less commercial we have, the better off we'll be. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think a lot of people see the commercial development that's been done so far as being a benefit to the resort versus being a detriment.
Can I make a comment? I may be out of line saying this, but that's never bothered me a whole lot, I guess. I don't think your problem is necessarily so much commercial development, residential development. I think the biggest problem that you have is the relationship that you have with your homeowners. And I think that if the HOA or the developer, whoever's in charge out
Right.
there, would work on that, this wouldn't even be an issue.
Well, I agree. I think
My
we'd,
perspective.
right,
okay?
well, we'd like to have the best relationship we can with all of our homeowners.
But that's not something we can solve.
No, that's a valid point, but we sent out 1,424 registered letters.
All this, that don't matter.
Right.
Okay, because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
No, I'm just saying, I think there are a lot of homeowners that aren't here, and the reason they're not here is
They're
because
happy.
we do have good relations
Happy.
with them, and they are happy.
I agree. I mean, typically you have the people who are content or satisfied or happy aren't going to be at a meeting like this.
Right, you're correct.
And I agree with that. What I'm saying is, I think this issue is contentious because of whatever has happened in the past.
I agree.
It's not necessarily what we're talking about today. So, thank you. All right, commissioners. I can't make motions, so.
Move that we approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And we're going to take about 10 minutes. We'll be back in here at 5:45 or thereabouts.
Yeah, I know we got a bunch. I just wasn't sure.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, me too. Do not, don't change that. Did you sit by all your friends?
I'm used to having Lee over here slap me when I'm saying too much. Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. Karen, are you ready? I think we're on item number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The next item on our agenda is number 4, the Crystal Beach Development Small Scale Amendment. This is request approved by ordinance. It's been reviewed by Bob Baronti. This small scale application, amendment application.
You're on 5.
They're looking at the internet.
Well then,
Emerald Bay.
sorry, it's trying to get us home. No, we need to be on number 3. I'm
Commissioners, do I have a
sorry.
motion?
The Emerald Bay build-out agreement. Sorry, I had one foot out the door, I guess. So let me start over, please. The Emerald Bay build-out agreement, this is a request to approve by agreement. It's been reviewed by Renee Bradley. It's a major development order application submitted by Stearns We Miller on behalf of Emerald Bay Development Company requesting the approval to execute a build-out agreement to define future development on the Emerald Bay DRI on approximately 114 acres with the future land use of mixed use in a zoning district of Coastal Center. Project abuts the north side of US 98 on the Walton-Okaloosa County line and is identified by the parcel numbers in your package. We'd like to ask the staff report be entered into record, and the applicant is here to present her case.
Accepted.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Dana Matthews. I'm a lawyer in South Walton. I represent Emerald Bay Development Corporation, who is the applicant for this essential built-out agreement approval. Just one correction in the recitals by Mr. Carpenter that this is a major development order application. It's actually a legislative item. Unfortunately, the county does not have a, quote, category for essential built-out agreement, so we had to pay the fee as if it was a major development order application. But this is not a QJ. This is not a typical DO that, that we would go through. This is a statutorily created right that an applicant of a DRI has, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. First of all, if you may not know, and you've looked at your packages, you've got the map, the aerial map. Emerald Bay is a DRI. It started in 1984, was approved. It's one of these unique DRIs because 3/4 of it's in Walton County, and the other, and I say 3/4 approximately, and part of it's in Okaloosa County. So it actually required going through the approval process through the DRI with both counties as well as the state and all its agencies back in '84 as a simultaneous path. And it was created the Tidewater DRI, and it went from the Gulf of Mexico to Choctawhatchee Bay. And it stayed in that capacity up until about 1991 when the then developer went bankrupt and the property got fractionalized, and it turned into, and it was approved in '91. There was an NOPC in both counties, and they changed it to the Emerald Bay DRI with the subsequent classifications. When you see these maps and you see these track Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, then A, B, C, that's how it all got changed in terms of master map designation. The last change, NOPC for both counties was in 2007, and we're dealing with a 114-acre site right now for purposes of the DRI. But what is an essential built-out agreement? It is a statutorily created right under Chapter 380, which, as you probably know, is the statute that deals with DRIs. And at some point in time in the life of a DRI, it's almost built out. And so it's recognized by the legislature. There's various criteria that you have to go by, and essentially you can apply to the county to enter into a, quote, written agreement. It's a contract. You should have it in your package, and whereby the developer and the county agree on what's left to develop, what are those entitlements, where is the undeveloped land, et cetera. The EBOA that you have before you didn't just come about a month ago. We've actually been working on this for approximately 2 years with both counties and their staff, their planning staff, their transportation staff, their engineering staff, as well as the legal teams, to come up with that document, the actual written agreement that you see with those exhibits A through, I think, J or H that are attached to it. That was a process. Went through many iterations before it got to that point, and before we filed our actual application, which only happened a few months ago. We have to show when we prepare this final EBOA and this application, and through the data that is collected and researched and analyzed by the various local government, is we have to show, number one, that historically that the developer has been in compliance with the DRI and Chapter 380 and the development orders have been issued by the county in the past, which we have, and it's been concurred by staff in both counties. We have to show that the EBOA in its current form as proposed is also consistent with the county's comprehensive plan and the land development code, which we've shown and demonstrated to the satisfaction of staff in both counties. We have to show where the vested entitlements that are left and conceptually, you know, where the undeveloped land that they could be built. And we don't go through site plan analysis or anything like that, bubble diagrams like we do with DRIs, but where's the general location of these entitlements, which is shown in the application itself. Again, very important to understand, this is not a quasi-judicial, very similar to what you did with Seascape, you know, and amended the DO. This is only to recommend approval so that the county can enter into this agreement with the developer for purposes of final build-out. And it takes it outside of the DRI process after that. Let me explain that. The legislature, through the lobbying of local government for the last 10 years, wanting to get rid of DRIs because they've been controlled at the state level with DEO, used to be the DCA, having final authority, making it a laborious process, time-consuming and expensive. Local government, as well as property owners and developers, have sought to get rid of DRIs. Right now, you cannot apply for a DRI in Florida anymore because they don't exist. But they can't make them go away because you have DRIs that have been around, like this one, for almost 35 years. So they've been pushing to try to get developers toward the end of the cycle to enter into these type of agreements with the counties. The local government knows that, we know that, and that's why we've been working on it for the last couple of years. That way, you can get rid of the state involvement. Last year, July 1st of 18, the legislature further devolved and turned over all, no more NOPCs. They don't exist anymore. That's why Mark was saying it's an amendment to the development orders, not an NOPC. They don't exist. They're giving control back to local government. The state is, essentially. So I think that's important for you guys to understand in case for this one as well as any more that may come up on the 6 DRIs that exist in this county. And I think the only EBOA, Renee can correct me if I'm wrong, there was an EBOA that was approved at Seaside, and then there was another one at Topsail. Was it last year, Renee, I think? When Jesse Wrigley did that, there was another one that went through you guys and the BCC that was approved for Topsail. So we understand the process. Ken Metcalf is a planner and a transportation guy from Stearns We, who has been a consultant with us for the last couple of years on this project. He's here to answer some questions. Jay Nettles, different entity, same family, Osborne family that owns Emerald Bay. What I want to show you is that that what we were required, the reason why it took 2 years is because both counties, understandably, hadn't even looked at this since 2007, other than annual reports that you got to file, you know, as a housekeeping matter. Nobody really looked at it because there's been no development. We all know what happened in the summer of 2008. So now all of a sudden, dust off the shelves, and here we are. We're talking to them about it, EBOA. It's like, okay, guys, we want you to go back historically, pull all the documents, show us where you're at, what's been built, what hasn't been built, ground truthing, if you will. Very long, expensive process, but it was good. It was good for all sides because I think we came up with a good product at the end of the day. If I can direct your attention to Exhibit D1 to the EBOA, the agreement itself, this, I don't know if it's up on that map on the board, but it's in your package. That's the exhibit that shows you what the entitlements are left. This is what it looks like.
What's the number on that again?
Carmen, you got-
D1.
Summary table.
I'll find it.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah,
What page
I'll
is
find
that
it,
on,
hand it
John?
back to you.
Not a page.
I don't know what page in here.
Yeah, it doesn't show up.
Towards
there.
the back.
Found it.
Look on mine.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, we got it. Thank you.
All right, essentially, out of all the exhibits, this kind of shows you how we got to the numbers that are left over in the entitlement. And of course, this table, because it's the same table that's in Okla's agreement as well, shows you that we've reduced single family in Walton County by 59 units. We've added 56 units of multifamily in Walton. You don't care about Okaloosa. Added and subtracted both in Okaloosa. So a total reduction of 76 single-family units between the two counties. added 146 units between the two counties, 90 of which is in Okaloosa County for multifamily. Added 70 RDUs in track 1. So at the end of the day, they minused 137 units. I mean, when you did all the equivalency analysis and we did the history and everything else, we're giving up 137 single-family units. Why would you do that? We don't got room for them anyway. It just makes sense, you know. You don't want to ask for more than regardless of whether you're entitled to it. If you can't, don't have the land mass to create it. There's another equivalency table in here. It's the next one on Exhibit E. It tells you how much commercial is left over. It's 57,664 square feet. If you note that it's only 17,000 of that is in Walton County, and the rest of that's on the Okaloosa side. I think if you will go to this, because you can look at tables all day long. I don't know about you guys, but I like pictures. I mean, because it kind of tells the story. It's the second to last, or it's the last page in the exhibit, which is your color-coded map, which is the aerials, Google Earth aerials of Emerald Bay, and then it'll show you, if you see this black line right down here in the middle, that's separating Okaloosa and Walton County. Obviously, Walton's on the east, and if you look at that yellow area there, you'll see those boxes, and it shows you how many units that are available in that area. That's going to be in the orange to the far right, 128 RDUs. And then that yellow there, it says 65 RDUs. That's all that applies into Walton County unless you go straight down to Emerald Coast Parkway and you see the red box. That's the area within the DRI where the 17,000 square feet of commercial is left available for this project on the Walton side. Just so you know, we've been to, they don't have a TRC in Okaloosa County. They call their planning department the Growth Management Department. They do everything internally, back and forth with the applicant, kind of like what we do in pre-app time. And it's been approved by them and recommended by them. I did attend Planning Commission with the Okaloosa back in June, and that was approved unanimously. I went to TRC with Walton County back in the end of June, and it was passed unanimously. There was a couple questions and issues that Renee and us and our team worked through since then to get 100% correction from Walton. There was a couple LDC issues we had to work through. We had a community meeting before we had our first planning commission in Okaloosa County at Seascape. I think there was about 40 of the neighbors in Emerald Bay that showed up. Had a very good meeting, and I don't know if any of them were here tonight or not. In this particular, we've had no comment letters in Okaloosa to date, and we're going to BCC next week, I think, with them. We've had one, I think, email on our application in Walton County that we got yesterday that Renee shared with us, and we responded back the best we could as to the questions that were being asked. So we haven't had a groundswell of opposition. I may be surprised with people in the audience, but be that as it may, I wanted to let you know that this has been out there and been talked about, and we've taken input as we've gone along. I'd like to make sure, besides the Planning Commission report, I assume, Renee, it's the last report that you got, right? That Mac introduced, and if you'll see throughout it, it was planning staff confirms that it meets the requirements of Chapter 7, 380, as well as the comprehensive plan and LDC. Engineering and traffic has reviewed it from the county. They've approved the traffic analysis and things that we've done. We would ask y'all to approve. Oh, wait a second, Ken. I'm going to introduce as applicants Exhibit 1. It's Ken Metcalf's what would have been a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to pass him out and introduce him, Mr. Chairman. If you have questions for him, he's here available to answer for you. and I'm here to answer any questions you have right now, and if people come up and speak, I'd like the opportunity to address you at one time with any comments that they may have. Thank you.
Kenneth, can you give us the gist of what this says? We don't have to sit here for 30 minutes and read it.
Certainly. For the record, my name is Ken Metcalf. I'm the Director of Planning with Stearns Weaver, Miller in Tallahassee. So as Dana mentioned, this is an essentially built-out agreement. All my PowerPoint does is kind of walks through some of that process. The first couple of slides give my professional background. As a planner, I ran the DRI program for the state for 10 years, administering it in South Florida. So I have a lot of experience in dealing with DRIs. I've also dealt with them, probably 30 of them around the state in my private work. And then I also served as the administrator for DCA for their transportation program. So I have a lot of transportation experience with the MPO that I worked with in the early part of my career, and then subsequently with the state. I'd just like to call your attention primarily to the third, I think it's the third slide that talks about the purpose of a DRI, essentially built-out agreement. So the idea with the agreement is really to not have to keep coming back to the board every time we might want to make a little adjustment. So instead of having to go through what used to be an NOPC process and is now just a local development order amendment, what the essentially built-out agreement does is just allows some discretion, allows the ability to build out the DRI with a certain number of units, certain amount of square footage, a little bit of flexibility in terms of being able to adjust lot boundaries as you build out without having to amend the map every time that you want to make a small adjustment. So that's the basic idea. Also, the idea is that you're so close to build out, there's no reason to keep filing for build out extensions. So you've probably seen a lot of those over the years from different DRIs. So it really streamlines the process for the applicant, it streamlines it for staff, saves a lot of money and time for everybody, really. I did the analysis to show that there's no additional trip generation from the project, so we're basically trading off single-family and multifamily units is the idea, and it's a wash on trips, no increase in the trips. We also did an analysis to be able to look at how we can convert commercial to residential or residential to commercial. If we want to make a minor adjustment, add 5,000 square feet of commercial, let's say, we could reduce dwelling units to offset that, or vice versa. If we wanted to increase the dwelling units by 30, we can reduce the commercial. So it allows some little bit of flexibility that way, but all within pretty limited, with a limited scope in terms of how much that can occur.
Okay.
So that's basically it.
I appreciate it. Anybody have any questions for the gentleman?
Thank you.
We'll open up public comments. Eric Hennington?
I'm a resident of Emerald Bay. I own a home built 2 years ago in that new area that they had in white where the lots are. See?
Yes, sir.
Right off the bat, I'm not going to be a hypocrite because they cleared trees to build my house. So I'm not going to complain about them continuing to develop. I'm also going to point out that a lot of signs went up at the front of Emerald Bay at the spring. I think the signs started going up. And many of us, myself included, assumed the HOA would give us some information about why are these signs going up. And I inquired 3 times with my HOA. They say nothing. I get no replies. So I really wasn't sure what was going on, but I've been out of state on business, and my neighbor, apparently everybody in our neighborhood got a certified letter a few weeks ago. I think that's right. I still haven't got mine at the post office, but he's out of state on business, so I drove back in today to be here for this meeting because the letter that we got is a little bit more explicit about what we as homeowners need to be worried about. And so our neighborhood is finished, which is great. We all love it. And the builder is, I think, going to build out single-family homes to the south of us, going back out. And it actually looks like it's going to be a new road, which would lead out as well, which is going to help the traffic in the area. So those are all good things. The problem is that certified letter, they use the word a multifamily unit or multifamily dwelling. But the certified letter that's sent out explicitly says apartments. So one of the questions I came here with today is what are we talking about? Are we talking about rental apartments in the middle of because that's an inflammatory word to use, apartments, instead of multifamily units or multifamily dwellings. So that was a question I came with. It's not an accusation, it's just a question. Why in the certified letter did somebody feel compelled to explicitly put the word apartments in there? So I would like an explanation as to what that means in the certified letter. The second thing I want to point out is on the multifamily, if they come in and tell me they want to build some townhouse condos in there, I really don't care. I'm happy with that. Our development's in pretty good shape. I like it. I'm going to get to a point about ingress and egress in a minute. But however, if this is not the map they sent in the certified. In the certified letter, they actually have a map that includes the future things they want to add. And what they want to, where they want to add these multifamily dwelling, in the letter I want to say again, they said apartments. They didn't say multifamily dwellings, they said apartments. They say they want to build them in that corner on a footprint that is smaller than my new area, which has 24 houses. So he's talking about it's 130, 140 multifamily units on that footprint. Now keep in mind, our 24 new houses added 50 cars to the backside of this. They built 140 units over there, that's 250 cars. Now if you know anything about Emerald Bay, you know it's a disaster going in and out of there. That's a long way out. Those of us that buy in there, we knew it. It's a really hard neighborhood to navigate. We also have the golfers coming in and out. So night traffic's fine, day traffic is a nightmare because there's a lot of retirees in here. Very few people cut their own grass. Those front houses are all nearly 30 years old now, so there's a lot of restoration going on. It's great. I'm not complaining. I'm actually happy to see it. But it's Cobalt Lane has been down to one lane for the last 2 weeks, just to give you an idea of and so when you talk about, let's add 30 new homes, that's one thing. You're going to add 140 multifamily units, that's 250 cars to the backside. So that one little thing they sent out, which was, again, for some reason, they used the word apartments, which is inflammatory in my view. And second is just to think that you could add 250 cars to the back of this, it doesn't seem realistic to me. And I hear we've done a lot of work, we got some consultants, all you got to do is go to this is a one entrance neighborhood. It's a gated community with one entrance. Today, we cannot take a left onto 98. Our neighborhood is restricted. And now, of course, the project is elongated. So we have to go right when we come out of our neighborhood already. So you've got the golfers during the day, you've got all the services coming in, and the new neighborhood, and I ain't even talked about that, they're all single-family units they're going to build. They're new houses like mine. Huff, the same builder's going to build them. They're going to probably be able to add maybe 30, 35 more. I don't know. They'll know the number of lots. But when you start talking about a really small footprint back there, last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to give somebody else the floor. We're flood zone X here. You can see where the water's going to come from. It's going to come from the bay, coming south. And I'm an engineer. I've built a lot of projects in my life. I can go through my neighborhood now, which I like, And in a good rain, we're already seeing the water at the top of the drains. I think they really have to look at the civil engineering on this, because if we ever get the right conditions and that bay backs up in here, when you concrete everything in here, they're gonna have to build parking. I guess my complaint is I just don't see the reality of when you see, like my neighborhood, my little area is 24 homes with retirees. We don't have any kids. Well, we got a few kids, maybe 2 or 3. But then they throw out a number of 140 on a small footprint in that back corner. It just doesn't seem realistic to me.
Okay, thank you. Nobody else signed up. Does anybody else wish to address this item? Okay, we'll close public comments.
Mr. Chairman, I want to introduce Exhibit 2, which is a copy of a letter that was sent to all owners dated July 24th of 19. This was the letter for purpose of this. There was a prior letter before that, but it said the same thing. But to answer the gentleman's question, he said that we're building apartments. I want to make sure it's very clear. The enclosed agreed-upon development is less than previously approved by the counties in 2007 and does not include apartments which were previously approved, showing that 193-unit reduction in Walton County alone. So I'm not sure he must have misread or read it too fast when he read the letter. We printed all these, and it also, the letter tells them where, when, and time for the meetings, and it also gives them the phone number for Jay Nettles. It gives them the phone number for Renee Bradley. It gives them the phone number for the planning department. It gives them emails. It gives them every opportunity to provide information. So, if I may.
Question, is there any place in there else in that letter refers to apartments?
Yeah, no, that's the only place. Says that they're not included. And matter of fact, in our application, we do not have apartments. As a matter of fact, it's in the EBO, I think. EBO, I think it's actually in the text language. There's no apartments that are going to be built in this multifamily. The map that is attached to the letter is the same map that I showed you earlier that is part of the application, which is also part of the EBOA itself. And it's not 140 units, it's 128 multifamily, and it's in the orange area in the top on the right-hand side of that map. And the reason why it's called multifamily, because that's what Walton County calls it under their coastal center mixed use future land use map. They call them multifamily, and multifamily, as is spelled out in the agreement, could be condominiums, townhomes, duplexes, patio homes, but not apartments, which would be allowed under the comprehensive plan. But we've made that unilateral decision contractually with the county not to put apartments in here. We want to get that out of the way. I can appreciate the last Mr. Pennington saying that he's an engineer and that 140 multifamily units generate 250 cars. That may or may not be true, but we've done a traffic analysis, as Mr. Metcalf said. It's been submitted to the county, and Will Metadier, on behalf of Dewberry for the county, has reviewed that, and we meet traffic concurrency. And in fact, in our PM, which is PM peak hours, which is what traffic gurus use in their ITE manuals and methodology for determining traffic, we actually reduce traffic with multifamily as opposed to single family. Don't ask me how that works. Ken can give you a lecture on it if you would like, but that's the fact. And by the way, the ITE manual is the one that's prescribed by state statute and by the county, in which you use when you look at traffic concurrency and impacts based on types of use. The other thing Mr. Pennington mentioned, it's a disaster going in and out of Emerald Bay because it's a one entrance in. I don't doubt that there's a problem there, and there's been a bigger problem with a 6-lane that's being built right now. And yes, there's a no turn left because it would be at their peril, and that was based on the contractors. My client, just so this board knows, has been to FDOT 4 times since 2014, paying money to consultants to prepare signal warrants to try to get a signal at that intersection. Been turned down 3 times. This last time was in July of 2018, and they went and they said, they finally, FDOT says, yep, we agree, you meet, you know, our requirements to have a light. But there's a spacing requirement. You're within a half a mile. You got to be at least a half a mile, so submit a variance request. They submit the variance request. They go to a meeting on October 1st of 2018, and there's a 3-person review panel, and they said, we can't approve it at this time, but we're going to continue to review findings, and we'll get back with you. I personally spoke with one of those 3 gentlemen 2 days ago, Tim Smith, in Chipley office, who I've met before and had some dealings with at Sandestin. And he was stunned that the transportation arm of FDOT had not followed up since October on this issue, and he said that he would be getting right on it. There's the Okaloosa County School Board, Walton County School Board, the county governments, various political people, our state representatives, including my client, and 3 letters from each of the 3 neighborhood associations in Emerald Bay and Sacred Heart across the street have all asked FDOT to give us a signal there that they don't have to pay for. We're waiting. So we feel the pain from Mr. Pennington and his neighbors. The developer is doing everything they can financially and politically to try to get this happen. So I tell you that. That is not a requirement as part of this EBOA because the DRI is shown in Exhibit G, and Exhibit J to the agreement is where you have to show what the history is and what the DRI requires. DRI requires any type of signalization to be paid for the development upon approvals by FDOT and by the proper permitting. So we're doing everything we can, and we hope to make it happen sooner rather than later, but not a requirement under the EBOA.
Quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
On these multifamily, I know you say you've reduced what was allowed. You're reducing what's allowed.
We did some equivalency change, reduce single family to get to exchange for multifamily.
Okay. Without that exchange, where would, I guess, the equivalent of that 128 units have been built?
Those 128 that are shown have not been built.
No, where would they have been without this change? I mean, any idea? They have to be back here somewhere.
Well, yeah, because those are the pieces that you see in orange, that's the only undeveloped land.
So that's the only place you can.
Exactly. If you look at like the piece on the left on Okaloosa side there, where it shows that orange box in the middle, it says 90.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was shown in 2007 as single family. That's been converted to multifamily for purposes of the EBOA that Okaloosa's agreed to, but we had to give up residential units to do so. Again, because you got to look at traffic. What is generating traffic? The equivalent give up, if you will, because you can't increase traffic to make it to be an inordinate burden on the infrastructure.
Well, I can see where a 2-bedroom apartment's going to have a whole lot less traffic than a 4-bedroom house. So that just makes sense.
And it is. I mean, and the methodology that IT, this is, as you know, it's a software database methodology, and again, it's a statutory requirement that you use the IT manuals and equivalency matrices to do these type of analyses for local government.
I understand.
The last thing I wanted to mention is there was a comment by Mr. Pennington about concern that the bay may overflow and the retaining wall and all that. The all current infrastructure, water, sewer, solid waste disposal, utilities, have all been looked at, and we have concurrency for what we've got. Now, when we go to actually submit for a development order application in the future for any particular project, y'all know what's involved in that, and it's a heck of a lot more detailed than what we're dealing with right now. You're dealing with geotech, civil engineering, stormwater, archaeological, environmental, you know, the whole 9 yards. We're not there yet. And that's a public hearing process, TRC, Planning Commission, Board of County Commissioners, public involvement.
Understand.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions, comments? Motions?
I was gonna have to say something up here, otherwise we just.
I
gonna
can't
stare
make
at
a
each other.
motion, so I'm waiting on you.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second is
We have a second?
Yep.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And now we can go to the Crystal Beach Development Small Scale Amendment.